What if everything you think you know about global power is upside down? What if the people running governments aren't actually the ones in control? And what if the real force shaping nations, elections, wars, and empires isn't a person, a country, or even a political ideology, but a web, an invisible structure made of promises, obligations, and numbers most people never see? Today, we re-pulling back the curtain on the secret debt web, quietly influencing every major power on Earth. It's a system so old, so subtle, and so deeply woven into daily life that you're not supposed to notice it exists, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. To understand today's hidden network of financial influence, we need to rewind far before digital banking, before Wall Street, even before the modern nation-state. Our story begins in the late Middle Ages, a time when kings ruled by force, not by balance sheets. But kings had a problem. Wars were expensive. Empires needed money, and taxes, especially in feudal Europe, were slow, unreliable, and often resisted. That opened the door for a new kind of power: private lenders. These weren't modern banks. They were wealthy merchant families who discovered something astonishing. If you control a ruler's debt, you control the ruler. Families like the Medici in Florence, the Fuggers in Germany, and later the Rothschild network understood a simple truth. Money could be a weapon, one that didn't need armies. As states grew, so did their debts. And in that growing dependency, a new relationship formed. Governments needed lenders. More than lenders needed governments. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was an evolution. But it set the stage for a world where debt, not democracy, quietly shapes global decisions. The first critical turning point came with something called sovereign debt. Money borrowed by governments, backed not by gold or treasure, but by future taxes. This was revolutionary. Instead of paying for wars with existing wealth, kings could borrow against tomorrow. Instead of slowing down expansion, debt sped it up. But every promise needed a guarantor, and that guarantor was the taxpayer. For the first time in history, the public inherited the debts of the powerful. This created the first strand of the global debt web. As more nations adopted this model, borrowing became normalized. Wars grew larger, expansion accelerated. Lenders gained leverage. But the real breakthrough, the moment the debt web became permanent, didn't arrive until 1694. That was the birth of the Bank of England, one of the earliest central banks created to fund national debt for the British government. It introduced a concept we still live under today. National debt isn't a problem. It's the foundation of the financial system. This idea didn't just spread, it became the default model for almost every major country over the next 3 centuries. The debt web had begun taking shape. As empires industrialized, debt became not just a tool, but a necessary ingredient for national growth. Railways, colonies, ships, factories, and armies all required money. Lots of it, and more every year. But then came the 20th century. 2 world wars, global reconstruction, massive technological leaps. Nations borrowed on a scale never seen before. To manage this financial chaos, leaders created new global institutions. The Federal Reserve in 1913, centralizing U.S. monetary power. The IMF and World Bank in 1944, shaping post-war financial rules. The petrodollar system in the 1970s, anchoring global trade to U.S. currency. Each one added new strands to the web. Then came the final breakpoint. August 15, 1971, the day the US left the gold standard. Money no longer had to be backed by anything physical. Now it could be created, expanded, weaponized, with a keystroke. Economies could grow forever, as long as debt grew with them. That shift changed everything. It made debt the core engine of global power, not an external support. And once that happened, the web became inescapable. As debt exploded, something unexpected occurred. Governments no longer borrowed just to fund wars or build infrastructure. They borrowed to keep the system running, to avoid recessions, to stabilize markets, to fund programs they couldn't politically afford to cut, to bail out banks when speculation got out of hand. Cause and effect spiraled into a loop. Debt created growth, and growth required debt. By the early 2000s, the global economy depended on constant expansion of borrowing. Consumer debt, corporate debt, government debt, and derivative markets built on top of debt. The 2008 crisis exposed the fragility. The world realized how interconnected everything had become. But instead of reducing the web, the response strengthened it. Central banks coordinated. Interest rates fell toward zero. New lending programs filled in the cracks. Money printing became routine, not an emergency measure. The web didn't weaken. It tightened. Today, global debt stands at levels almost unimaginable a century ago. Not millions, not billions, trillions. According to modern data, total global debt is now more than $300 trillion, far exceeding the total wealth produced by the entire planet in a year. But here's the twist. The system functions because no one is supposed to pay the debt back. It's not a ledger. It's a structure of dependence. Countries owe other countries. Governments owe institutions. Institutions owe each other. Corporations owe banks. Banks owe central banks. Central banks hold promises backed by the future itself. Break one strand and the rest vibrate. Break too many and the entire web collapses. That's why every crisis, from 2008 to the recent global shocks, is met with the same response. More liquidity, more borrowing, more intervention, more dependence. You're watching a system trying to keep itself alive. Every reform since the 1970s has had the same problem. It treats symptoms, not the structure. You can raise interest rates, cut programs, print money, freeze debt, rebalance, trade, negotiate relief packages. But none of these touch the core issue. The world economy requires constant debt expansion to survive. No political party, no global summit, no economic model has found a way out. That's the final twist. The debt web isn't controlled by a single entity. It's controlled by the system's need to perpetuate itself. That's why it's so powerful, not because someone designed it, but because everyone depends on it. Look at today's world and the pattern is unmistakable. Nations struggling under record debt, central banks coordinating interest rate moves, accelerating currency devaluation, rising inequality tied directly to asset-backed lending. Geopolitical tensions rooted in financial leverage, and global institutions stepping in to stabilize markets. Every crisis reveals the same truth. Debt isn't a side effect of the system. It is the system. And that's the web most people never see. So here are the three truths. 1. Debt has replaced resources as the foundation of global power. Nations rise and fall not by territory or armies, but by financial leverage. 2. The modern economy requires perpetual borrowing to stay alive. Debt isn't a flaw, it's fuel. And 3, the web is invisible because we're trained to accept it as normal. But once you recognize the pattern, the world looks different. We're living through a moment where this web is stretching to its limits. New technologies, new currencies, and new geopolitical alignments are testing the system that has quietly governed global power for centuries. If the web shifts or snaps, the consequences will reach everyone. So stay aware, stay informed, and if you want to understand the hidden financial forces shaping our world, subscribe, because we're just getting started. The deeper you look, the clearer the web becomes.